uncorrupted, undefiled, untouched by false values because of purity of inward heart. Only this is therefore the proper parent of enlightenment. Illumination comes to the pure of heart, and those who live as far as humanly possible in peace with all other living things. Now we're going to see some of this coming along one of these days right here in our society. We're going to see that all this violence, all this clamor, all this pomp and circumstance is going to gradually fade away because it is solving nothing. All this effort to fight our way to peace, this effort to work our way to wealth and be happy at the same time, all these false values have to go, and the ability to rise above them gradually redeems the person. Every truth seeker who is honest, everyone who really recognizes the need for greater inner strength, is therefore becoming more and more a person of purity of heart and mind. It's interesting to note that in early English and other languages, the word virgin was not limited to the feminine. One of the kings of England was called the Virgin King. It was simply a symbol of integrity, of purity of motive, of purity of intention, and of the living of a righteous life in a world of temptations. So the idea of the achievement of the virgin self, the coming of the mother of the mystery before the mystery itself can be born, indicates the idea that in the heart doctrine, love becomes the mother of enlightenment. Love becomes the mother not only of human enlightenment, but in some mysterious way, expanded beyond our comprehension, becomes the one great gate that leads into the infinite. All other factors are secondary to the unselfish love of one human being for another, and of all human beings for their creating power. All these things are substanced in the Buddhist teachings. There are all kinds of legends and fables about all of these things, but every one of them has something to do with the fact that the inner person is the mother of truth, that this inner person is the love of truth, is the purification of life, and is the consecration of conduct, until finally it is the perfected soul that brings forth the Redeemer. This all becomes part of a world message. It is everywhere among the doctrines of mankind, because it is always something that has come out from within the being itself. These different religions are the human being's gradual unfolding of their own potentials. Little by little we demand a different type of deity because we are becoming a different type of being. The God of battles is no longer our saints. We no longer respect authority, power, despotism, and tyranny. We no longer expect to be slaves of some eternal despot whom we can never understand and from whose tyranny we can never escape. This type of theology is gone. And the kind of theology also that teaches or tries to teach us that because of a few short years in this world, our eternal destiny is measured, that we must go to some other place and suffer forever for sins committed by our own ignorance. These things simply will not fit into the Buddhist philosophy of life. Rather, it is always a case of growth. And I think it's also important to remember in thinking of the law of reincarnation and karma as taught in Buddhism. Buddhism does not teach that karma goes on forever, and that forever we make the same mistakes, forever we suffer for them, and we keep on suffering and going on, and as a result of eternal mistake, we are eternally reborn. This is not the Buddhist idea at all. We are not here to go on forever by rebirth. We are here to release ourselves from the wheel of the law by transcending the level of living which caused the mistakes. In other words, we are not punished but once for any one thing. And punishment is not necessarily painful. Punishment is recognition of realities, and the individual who outgrows a fault corrects it. He does not have to be tyrannized forever. The end is not punishment. The end is revelation. When the individual sees the reasons, understands them, and corrects them in himself, he is therefore in that time released from the wheel of karma. He is released from the wheel of rebirth. The enlightened soul only returns by voluntary intent. Those who have gone a long way in enlightenment, or those who are in great need of more travel, but are aware of the facts, are born again. But the great and illumined soul is born perhaps with the greatest importance, because it is a voluntary action. The Bodhisattva's rebirth is a voluntary action. Now, in the case of Buddha, there is a very interesting story about this. There's a Bodhisattva over a period of ages. He paid all his karma, went through all the embodiments shown by the carvings on the walls of the Borobudur in Java, and at last he came to the final decision to attain the nirvana. But there was one debt he had not paid, a debt from way back, a small and insignificant karmic occurrence that was not finished. But it was that unfinished business that made it possible for him to come back, which was another side of their philosophical thinking. So when the poor man gave him the tainted food because he had nothing else to give, and Buddha ate it, and as a result died, he told his disciples that in accepting this tainted food, he had passed his last test. He had made right the last wrong in his existence, and therefore, having attained this, he could then go on. But instead of going on, he held that fault for ages in order to be able to come back. It was the doorway through which he could come back until he corrected it. This is kind of an interesting sidelight on some of the symbolism involved in these stories. One of the most beautiful stories, I think, of that, of course, is the Bodhisattva doctrine of Northern Asia. As we look upon the magnificent statuary and paintings and images of Japan and Korea, we see these wonderful, radiant, luminous figures of the Bodhisattva, which means the enlightened soul, the enlightened self, the enlightened being. The Bodhisattvas are the ones who have gone all the way except the last step. And there is a story of the Bodhisattva Kannan, or Kuan Yin, that at last, having gone through all the sorrows of life, having been reborn in every kingdom in order that it might know the pain of living things, having taken the obligation of harmlessness to all that lived, this being was now able to face perfection. And as it stood at the gates of the infinite to go through, it heard a funny little cry, and looked and saw a tiny birdling in a nest, the mother dead beside it. And in that moment, the Bodhisattva took the great obligation of renunciation, and took to itself the vow that it would not attain the liberation or accept it until it could take every living thing, including the soul of that little bird, with it into the infinite. Beautiful little legend. Beautiful. It tells us something, all of us. And here on Mother's Day, it seems to me a very good thing that it does, because it helps us to understand a lot of life that we pass through too lightly and too insignificantly. All that we are striving to do in our best moments and in the moments of our own enlightenment, we are striving to be useful, to help all that lives, because in this way we achieve the full labor of the Shakti. The Great Mother comes in all of us when love takes precedence over every other emotion in life. It comes when a complete renunciation of self ends selfishness. A complete renunciation of gentleness ends all hate, stress, and tension. And I think today maybe we are in great need of this kind of a religion, this kind of an attitude towards life. Under the pressure of our economic situations and political stress and international complications, the individual is moved to attitudes that are not right for him. He hates. He is belligerent. He despises. He gossips. He condemns. He is forever looking for the wrong in things. And in so doing, he locks himself in the illusion of his own material attitudes. I think there is something to be said for Buddhist mysticism which could be carried over into any religion. In other words, Buddhism is not primarily interested in making Buddhists. It is not interested just in converting anybody to anything. What it is interested in is seeing all human beings living nearer to a purpose of universal peace, of universal accord, of universal understanding, of universal affection and regard. And therefore, in this case, the Son, or the Eternal, comes to each person and asks the right to come in. This is Christ knocking at the door. Each person has the right to accept into itself this power, a dedication to the release of soul power, which is to be found by gentle meditation, prayer, thoughtfulness, consideration, and the gradual disciplining of false attitudes. If the individual becomes capable of eliminating most or the greater examples of his own inconsistencies, both the Buddhist and many other religions have also a formula represented by Yakushi Niori, the Buddhist deity of healing, the healing power of the truth, that in some mysterious way even physical sickness often has to give way to enlightenment. It can be strangely made better. There is also a very interesting formula about the great physician in the Buddhist doctrine. And the great physician came to each for a person who was sick, but they rejected him because his medicines were not pleasant to them. He told them frankly that the healing medicine was that by which the soul was changed. So they rejected him, and he went his way, and no one paid any attention to him because they wanted to have health through excess rather than through discipline. And so one by one they got sicker, until finally, in desperation, they called the great physician back and agreed to follow his instruction. When they did, they got well, and everyone lived happily ever after. The great physician is, in the Buddhist doctrine, the power of love over hate. It is the power of tranquility, the power of the great paternal feelings that we have. And it is represented very largely when each person becomes a parent of others. Each person becomes the immaculate parent for the incarnation of the great light of the world. These things are perhaps also shadowed down into our material existence. And on Mother's Day, it is very good to think of some of these things, because there is a tremendous power in the simple fact of motherhood itself, by which life is changed and transformed, and each individual moves from merely part of a pattern to one of those who is becoming a creator, someone through whom life is to come into the world. And in this life, we have the physical. But in the philosophical level, this light becomes the mystical. And light as physical perpetuates the species. Light as mystical perfects the whole world. and all that inhabits it and all that works through it.